So thank you everyone for coming today. My name is Brandon Grant. I'm the marketing director here at QuoteWerks. And today we're going to be going over the new QuickBooks Online integration with QuoteWerks. Just have a very short PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go over, just kind of outline what the integration does with QuickBooks Online, and then we'll actually walk through a full demonstration of how to use it and also how to set it up. At the end, we will take questions. So if you have questions about specific to the integration, we'll answer those. If you have questions about QuoteWerks, we'll try to answer as many of those as possible as well. So the QuickBooks Online integration, for those of you that are using QuickBooks or have used QuickBooks in the past, it's going to be very similar, so you won't see too much of a difference. For those of you that may be new to using QuickBooks, or at least QuickBooks with QuoteWerks, essentially what the integration is going to do is allow you to export any document from QuoteWorks to QuickBooks Online as an estimate, invoice, or sales receipt. We also have full item list support, so that means we'll be able to pull items from QuickBooks Online. So if you've already set up your item list in QuickBooks and you want to be able to search on those items and pull them into QuoteWorks so you can quote out your customers, you're going to easily be able to do that. We're also able to write items into QuickBooks. So if you are managing your items outside of QuickBooks, if you want to manage them in QuoteWorks and you quote out a new item that you end up selling, we'll actually create that item when we export it over to QuickBooks Online for you. Contact support, very similar. If you're maintaining your contacts in QuickBooks Online, we'll be able to pull them, search them, and add them into the QuoteWorks document. If you'd rather have QuoteWorks kind of manage them for you, or you're using another CRM or PSA system to pull your contacts, QuoteWorks will actually create any contacts that don't exist when we're exporting documents. So, the big plus of the integration is that you're only going to have documents essentially exported to QuickBooks that have closed, that have sold. So you're only going to have items that you're selling, only contacts that you're selling to in your QuickBooks system. PO support, we do offer purchase order support. So if you're going to use QuoteWorks to create a purchase order in QuickBooks, we'll have that for you, and we'll demonstrate that today as well. And then the QuickBooks Online integration can be purchased as an annual or monthly subscription. So either one, it's kind of what's easiest for you. We do offer trials, so if you want to test it first, make sure it's going to, save you that time and money. Absolutely, just let us know. We could be happy to set you up with a free trial of it. So the QuoteWorks and QuickBooks Online integration, kind of touched on this already, but this kind of walks through a little more detail the integration points. So we're going to have the integration with the documents. So we're going to be creating those estimates, those invoices, and those sales receipts. Those documents are going to look like they came directly from QuickBooks. So it's going to look like that you are actually pulling them directly from, or creating them directly from QuickBooks into QuoteWorks. Additionally, the item integration is going to be, again, like I said, creating those items that don't currently exist in QuickBooks. So as you quote new items, if you sell a lot of different items that change, we're only going to create items that don't currently exist in QuickBooks Online for you. We're also going to be able to pull items from your QuickBooks list. So if you're setting up items in your QuickBooks list and you want to pull from them, we can do that. You can mix and match. So if you're going to search for some items from your QuickBooks list and some from your QuoteWorks list, or from another CRM or PSA system, or from your own items database that you set up, you'll be able to kind of mix and match there as well. Contact integration, again, this is where we'll be able to pull those customers from QuickBooks if you'd like, or we can, on the other side, create them if they don't currently exist in QuickBooks when we export the document over to QuickBooks. And then purchase orders, this will allow you to create those purchase orders in QuickBooks Online if you like. So when you create the purchase order in QuoteWorks, we can also essentially export that document over to QuickBooks. One thing to keep in mind for that, we do recommend essentially deciding if you're going to have QuoteWorks create that estimate, invoice, or sales receipt, or if you're going to have QuoteWorks create the PO. We don't want you to create both documents because the documents are separated. There's no way to kind of connect them in QuickBooks Online. So just keep that in mind, that if you're going to have QuoteWorks create that document in QuickBooks Online, just decide if you're going to have it created kind of like once the customer has kind of move forward and you're going to create it then in QuickBooks Online, or if you're going to wait and you're going to do like the purchasing in QuoteWorks and then have it export over to QuickBooks Online. So you just kind of have to decide what the workflow is going to be best for you. One is not necessarily better than the other. It's just what you're used to or what you'd like to do. All right. So as always, we have a ton of resources online. So if you do have questions, feel free to give us a call, send us an email. We have a bunch of videos on the website, so definitely check those out. The help file is available for you as well. The help file is essentially the user manual that has all the information about QuoteWerks, all the features related to QuoteWerks available for you. We do a lot of webinars, so those are always available. So if you missed a previous webinar, you can view those. We also have a forum on the website under the support page. So if you go to the support page on our website, you can actually see and sign up for the forum. It's a great place to interact with other QuoteWerks users. We have a lot of partners that are on the forum that help answer questions and offer other services as well. So be sure to check out those resources and take advantage of those as needed. Definitely a great place to contact us and get more information is following us on social media. So Facebook, Twitter. We post all our videos on YouTube, and then obviously connecting on LinkedIn. We also have various events. We have a QuoteWerks training for ConnectWise users here in Orlando coming up on November 7th. I think we only have 1 or maybe 2 seats left at the most. So any ConnectWise users, if you're on the webinar today, if you're interested in getting that training, if you're coming down for IT Nation, it'll be the day before. Sign up now because, like I said, I know we only have 1 or 2 seats max left. For everyone, we are hosting our first annual QuoteWerks User Summit this year. It's going to be in February. There's a bunch of information on the website about that. If you go to the main page, you'll see a link to it. You can read about the agenda and everything we're doing there. So definitely check that out if you're interested in kind of getting some more in-depth QuoteWerks training. The User Summit is going to be a really great event. It's going to be the first one we've ever held, so highly recommend checking that out. It's also going to be in February, so we are located in sunny Orlando, Florida. So February is pretty much the best time of year to visit, so definitely check that out. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the integration. So I'm going to exit out of my slides here, and we'll get started in QuoteWerks. So I'm going to walk through some of the basic setup first, then we'll actually go through exporting the document, and then I'll show you kind of like the export details on how we set that up. So the first thing I wanted to set up is if you wanted to set your contacts or pull contacts from QuickBooks Online, I'll show you how to do that. It's going to be very, very simple. We're simply going to click on Contacts, Set up Contact Manager, and then you would simply click on QuickBooks. Now, if you haven't set up QuickBooks Online to be your default accounting integration, you won't have this option, but I'm going to show you how to do that as well. But I just want to show you how easy it is kind of once you've set it up to use QuickBooks Online as your accounting software, how you can pull contacts from there. Once your contact is set, you'll then be able to search, and it's going to work just like the search previously, where you would simply type in by the QuickBooks customer, and you'll be able to pull that company information into QuoteWerks automatically. The other item I wanted to show you that's very quick is setting up your product sources. So if you want to link to the QuickBooks item list, that's going to be done under Products, Set up Product Sources, and then just click New. And you're going to select QuickBooks from your drop-down here, and then just follow the arrows, just finish it. It'll take just a couple seconds. And when you do, you'll have your product list appear in your product lookup window. So you'll have access to all your QuickBooks Online items. Now, if you haven't set up the integration yet with QuickBooks Online, you won't have access to this. But again, once you set that up, that'll be very easy to do and to use. Okay, so to set up the integration with QuickBooks Online, the first thing you're going to have to do from QuoteWerks is get a subscription, whether it's a trial subscription or you've purchased a subscription. You're going to need to get the online subscription from QuoteWerks. Once you have that, under your Tools Options menu, you'll click on your Tenant Account tab. And the Tenant Account tab is where you'll have a tenant account number and password. Now, if you already have Quote Valet, you'll already have this in here, and so we'll just essentially turn on the subscription for you. If you don't have Quote Valet, then we'll give you this tenant account number and password. This is specific to your installation, so there's not going to be user-based. Once you buy the subscription or are trialing the subscription for QuickBooks Online, it's just a site-wide subscription, so you can have as many users use it as you want. Once you've done that, you're simply going to click on Validate Subscription to turn that subscription on. And then we would move on to the accounting tab to set it up. So I'm going to go through the setup here in just a minute, but I just want to show you kind of where you get started with that. So Using the integration is going to be just like using the desktop integration with QuickBooks. You're still going to have your QuickBooks desktop icon here. For those of you who are not familiar with this, there's going to be an icon on your QuoteWerks installation that will let you export your documents over to QuickBooks. It's also available under the Tools menu, where you can click on Export to QuickBooks. That'll bring up the same window. So if I click on the QuickBooks icon here, this will show me a list of documents that are ready to be exported to QuickBooks. You'll also see I have the ability to filter by date and sales rep. So I've just set it to this year for now. Since this is my demo installation, I don't have too many documents in here. But then on the right-hand side, you see there's an option to display the unexported orders where the doc status is equal to open. So I've basically set up a default filter that I'm always looking for to export to QuickBooks. I've set mine to orders instead of quotes. That way, when a quote is converted to an order in QuoteWorks, it'll be ready to export. So when you have your list of documents, you'll be able to select single or multiple documents at a time. We could even select these all, and you can batch these. Now, when you batch and export to QuickBooks, it's going to export each document individually. So we're not going to combine these into a single document that we send over to QuickBooks. It's not going to work that way. We're going to export all these documents at once, though. So it's a good thing that you can run kind of like at the end of the day, maybe the end of the week, depending on what your volume is. So you don't have to go in here and export the documents each time. So just kind of however you want to set that up, it's up to you. But this is an easy way to kind of send over all the documents at once. I'm just going to do one here just to get started. And once you highlight your document, let's do this one here. We're going to click Export, and you'll see it'll log it into QuickBooks Online. And then it's going to check a couple things behind the scenes for you. It'll kind of let you know what it's doing is verifying some of the items. So when you're exporting a new document into QuickBooks Online, any items that don't exist currently in your QuickBooks Online item list actually have to be created. So QuoteWorks is going to prompt you to create them. So you'll see here this window appears, and it says Create New QuickBooks Online Item. So QuoteWorks sent over this item, this manufacturer part number, and QuickBooks did not find a match. So we're saying, okay, let's go ahead and create it. So this is going to be the item description. We can then set our item types, typically inventory, non-inventory, or service. So this is a non-inventory item, so I'm going to set it as non-inventory. You'll then select your income account. So if I wanted to say it's going to be, say design income, and then I can select this account. If you're purchasing this from a vendor, so if it's for like a PO, and you need to have reference the COGS account or the expense account and the asset account, you'll be able to do that as well. You just need to check the box, and then once you set it, you'll be able to do that. For our example, I'm just going to leave that unchecked since we're just creating the new item in QuickBooks here since it's a non-inventory item. And then once I'm ready, I can hit OK, and it'll create that item in QuickBooks. It'll then continue to prompt for every new item on the document. So any items that don't currently exist in QuickBooks, we're going to go ahead and create. You'll see each time it'll prompt you so you can change the item type and the income account if you want to. These are set as defaults for my installation, but you could change these. You could leave them blank if you wanted to, and then QuickBooks will just remember your previous setting. So you can choose the same setting, or you can change it if you'd like. In my example, I'm going to go ahead and keep it the same, and then I'll click OK. And I'm just going to go through the rest of them here. And then I have mine currently set up to create the QuickBooks estimate. And then I'm actually exporting a second document here. So we'll go ahead and do this one too. And then once we finish here, you're going to see a confirmation. Now, if you only export a single document in QuickBooks, you'll get a little different looking message that will show you just saying, hey, this document was exported to QuickBooks as estimate, whatever number it was. In this case, since I did two, it's going to say, hey, you did two of these. So it's 1009 and 1010. And then it'll tell you kind of how to get and view them in QuickBooks Online. So if I go into my QuickBooks Online integration and we go to our sales dashboard here and we filter by estimates, you can see I've actually sent over 3 estimates today, but the 2 I sent over, 1009 and 1010, are right here, and you can click on that if you want to open it and view it in QuickBooks Online. So like I said, it's going to recreate this item or this document in QuickBooks Online just like you did it in QuoteWorks. Now I have mine set up to export over as an estimate. You do have the option to send it over as an invoice instead. So if I back up here and I go back to invoices, you'll see You have the option for estimates for your invoices, and then you can do sales receipts if you want to. It's probably the least common one at this point, but if you do want to send it over as a sales receipt rather than an unpaid invoice, you do have that option. From here, you can do anything that you need to this document at this point. This is a QuickBooks Online document. It's been created in QuickBooks Online, just like it was created by QuickBooks. So there's not going to be any difference there. Like I said, the item will now exist in your item list. If that customer didn't exist in QuickBooks Online, they do exist now. All right, if we go back here, now if we go back into QuoteWorks, you'll see those two documents that I exported are no longer appearing in my list because they have now been exported. So QuoteWorks updates that document in QuoteWorks as well to mark it as exported. So essentially, when you decide to send the document from QuoteWorks to QuickBooks, two things are happening. A, we're going to create the document in QuickBooks Online, and then B, we're going to mark the document as exported exported to QuickBooks so that it doesn't appear in your non-exported documents for QuickBooks so far. All right, I see a lot of questions about the integration. For any of you that are new that weren't here at the introduction, I'm going to answer all the questions at the end of the integration. So definitely webinar. So definitely feel free to post questions in there, and I'll circle back to those here at the end of the webinar. Okay, so exporting the document over to QuickBooks is very, very easy. So let's talk about the setup. So there is some setup involved here. I'll kind of walk you through the steps first, and then we'll talk about the different setting options. So the first thing you'll have to do is what I talked about is receive your QuoteWorks to QuickBooks Online subscription. Once you have that, you'll need to do a validation of the subscription. For those of you that don't have Quote Valet already, then we'll give you a tenant account number and a password to enter into QuoteWorks. You'll always want to make sure you test it first just to make sure that it is valid. And then the next thing you'll need to do is validate your QuickBooks Online integration. If you do not see this option, you are not on the latest version of QuoteWorks, so just make sure you update QuoteWorks. You need to be on version 5.2 build, I believe build 6 or later. So if you're not on one of those builds, you won't see this option for the QuickBooks Online integration. So just update to the latest one, and that'll have the integration for you. So we'll validate our subscription. Our QuoteWorks will read back to you and tell you that your subscription type is valid, let you know when it's going to expire, and then you can hit OK. And then the next thing we need to do is actually activate or turn on the subscriptions or the integration. So we're going to click on our accounting tab here. A lot of you may have the QuickBooks Desktop option already selected, so you want to make sure you change the drop down to QuickBooks Online. I have mine checked for sandbox mode because we're using a sandbox environment, so we're using a demo account of QuickBooks Online. For a lot of you, you won't have that, so you won't need to have that checked. Let me go ahead and we'll change our connection here. So when you set up your QuickBooks Online integration, you're going to see something very similar to this, where it'll say establish connection. So that's going to be very important. You're not going to be able to set up the link or even test it until you establish that connection. So once you've set the link type to QuickBooks Online, you'll choose establish connection. QuoteWorks will redirect you to QuickBooks. And let me just select my correct company. It's then going to prompt you, if you haven't logged into your QuickBooks Online account, it'll prompt you to log in. Once you log in, it'll bring you to the authorization screen. So the authorization screen will just have a simple button that says authorize. So you're going to see it's going to have QuickBooks Online and QuoteWorks. So we'll choose authorize. And then once it has successfully authorized, you'll receive this notification here. So this will appear in your web browser that QuoteWorks and QuickBooks Online have connected. It was successful. And then you can see here, it says, please switch back to QuoteWorks and click on the test button. This is very important because if you skip this step, you will not be able to test your integration. So you want to make sure you test this first because QuoteWorks is going to send some information over QuickBooks Online to make sure it's correctly and successfully authenticated. So just keep that in mind. Very important. After you set up that integration, you click test. And then once you've done that, now you can set up the link. So for those of you that are using QuickBooks Desktop, this will look very familiar. For those of you that are not using QuickBooks Desktop, don't worry, I'm going to walk through these steps as well. This is going to be, obviously, since I'm in the US, my US version of QuickBooks Online. For those of you that are in Canada or the UK, Australia, really anywhere, The only differences you'll see is going to be on the sales tax tab. That's really where you're going to see the difference in your integration, but all the other tabs will be exactly the same, so you don't have to worry about the settings for anything else being different, so you can kind of follow along with me here. The transaction tab is going to be kind of like the main tab where most of your settings are going to be available. So you'll see here our transaction type. This is where you're choosing how QuoteWerks or what type of document QuoteWerks is going to create in QuickBooks Online. So it's an invoice or estimate, invoice, or sales receipt. So whichever one you'd like. For a lot of these settings, there's not a wrong answer. There's not one that's better than the other. It's just how are you currently doing things? What kind of document you want QuoteWerks to create? For a lot of you probably will have it sent over as an invoice because you're doing your quoting in QuoteWerks. And then once the customer accepts that quote, you're going to send it over to QuickBooks. There are some functionality that's only available in estimates and not invoices. But for those kind of questions, just contact your accountant. They can probably tell you which one you should export over as. Job name, that's only for estimates only, and you can choose whether it's going to not auto-generate, using the document number or the document name from QuoteWerks. Document numbering, you have two options. You can use the QuickBooks auto numbering or the QuoteWerks document number. If you're already using the QuickBooks numbering for the desktop and you want to continue using that for the online version, I'd say go ahead and keep that. If you want the documents to have the QuoteWerks number so you know it came from QuoteWerks, that's fine too. Again, like I said, a lot of these settings are going to be just kind of preference and the way you're doing things in your business, not necessarily one's better than the other. Date of transaction, this one, you have the option between document date or date exported. We typically recommend date exported for that setting, just because date exported is going to be when the document essentially was created in QuickBooks Online. If you do the document date, that'll be the date of the QuoteWerks document, so it might be from 6 months ago, so that could throw off some of your accounting things. So we typically recommend date exported, but we give you the option there. If you have any kind of customer message you'd like to post in the document, you can do that as well. And then we have a couple options. So here it says if the item does exist, basically how do you want QuoteWerks to handle it? I have mine set to do not update, or you can choose to update the cost and the price. If the item does not exist in QuickBooks, we automatically create it. So just a requirement in QuickBooks Online that you can't post an item into a QuickBooks document that doesn't exist in the item list. So we have to create it. So that's why there's no option for that. So if the item does not exist, QuoteWerks will automatically create it for you. If the item does exist, then we could choose to update the cost and the price of the item list. If you don't want QuoteWerks to do that, maybe you do a lot of negotiation with your customers on how they handle prices or what you sell your items at, then you can choose not update, and it'll have the correct pricing and cost on the document, but the item list item itself would not update. Same thing for if the customer does exist, we can choose to update. So maybe they have a new address that they gave you, we can update it. Maybe they got married and they changed their last name, whatever. We'll change that and update that information. If you just want to leave it as is and you'll go in and you'll change it later, that's fine as well. We can leave it as do not update. Same thing for the items. If the customer does not exist, QuoteWerks will automatically create them. Again, QuickBooks requires when we create a new document that there has to be the items have to exist already in the item list and the customer has to exist already in the customer list. Memo. This is where you can put some information in the memo field here. So if you wanted to put reference that this document came from QuoteWerks or something like that, you can do that. And then the PO numbering, just like before, if you want to use the QuoteWerks PO numbering or the QuickBooks auto numbering, again, up to you. For those of you that are exporting as invoices or estimates, you can choose the class for those documents. I don't have any set up in mind, so I don't have any. And you can also have it retrieve from a specific QuoteWerks field. There's a couple custom fields that are available to you, so you can choose if you want to set those. Export settings. So when we talked about that setup tab or the export window when I was exporting my documents over to QuickBooks Online, these are those export settings. These are kind of the default ones we recommend just because it makes the most sense with how QuoteWerks is used. You can always change it if you'd like, but this is what we typically recommend, where we have the doc status is equal to invoice, order, or quote. Those are the 3 document types supported in QuoteWerks. And if the doc status is equal to whatever it's going to be. So in my case, if my export window is only going to show me QuoteWerks orders that have a document status of open. So if the document status has been changed to exported or to something else, it won't appear in that list. And you'll see here, after it's been exported, we'll actually change the QuoteWerks document status to whatever is listed here. This is a list of my document statuses in QuoteWerks, so you can change your document statuses. You can add some in there if you'd like. That's done on the Sale Info tab in QuoteWerks. It's kind of a quick way. If you click on document status, you can update that. So the export setting is very important, because if you don't set some type of filter or criteria here, you're going to have a long list of documents that probably shouldn't be exported to QuickBooks, and you're going to have to kind of filter through those. So that's why I recommend kind of going the route of setting it as the doc type is equal to order and the doc status is equal to open, and then we'll change the status exported. If you want to call it something else rather than exported, you can do that. Just make sure you set something there. Like I said, sales tax is going to be the one window that will change depending on your location. So if you're in the US or Canada, or the UK, Australia, wherever you're located, this window is going to look a little different. So you'll just need to go through and kind of change your settings to what's important to you here. All right, so the mappings tab is going to be your mapping settings. Basically, these are how we're transferring information from QuoteWerks to fields in QuickBooks. So for instance, the transaction bill to mapping. In QuoteWerks, we have 3 fields that you can choose from. Typically, you have your sold to, ship to, and bill to. For the integration with QuickBooks, we're going to let you pull from the sold to, which is kind of like the primary contact field in your QuoteWorks documents, and also the bill to field. So you're going to choose which ones you want. Here, I use sold to as my default, but you can change it to the bill to. You know, if you're selling to one location, but you're actually billing the headquarters or something like that, you can adjust that. Very important here, QuoteWerks field to QuickBooks item name, the manufacturer part number. What that means is that QuoteWorks is using the manufacturer part number field to match with the QuickBooks item name to check to see if that item currently exists in QuickBooks. I know a lot of you don't want to have QuoteWorks create a new item, a brand new item every time you sell like a computer or a laptop, so you have generic part numbers. This is where you can adjust that, where you can change if you're going to look from like the vendor part number or one of the like the custom text fields. So you can kind of set that as well, so you can change that. But this will be the default setting for the majority of you, where QuoteWorks uses the manufacturer part number for our unique identifier. QuickBooks is using the item name, so we're just kind of checking on those and matching those up to see if they exist. Discount item name and charge item name. Same thing, if you use like the discount items and charge items in QuoteWorks on a regular basis, you're going to need to set some type of mapping here, so QuickBooks Online knows how to handle that. Grouped items. So if you don't want QuoteWorks to bundle your entire, if you're using groups in QuoteWorks, if you don't want QuickBooks to have the individual items, you just want to kind of roll them up into a single item, you'll have this option checked. This is not the normal setup. So I know some of you do use this functionality, but this is not the normal setup. So for most of you, you're going to leave that unchecked because you do typically want those individual line items in QuickBooks. But if for some reason you don't, you can leave that unchecked. And then there's a couple custom fields that are enabled or that are available, and those will be available here, and you can choose on the drop-down to map them between QuickBooks and QuoteWorks. QuickBooks Online does have a much more limited number of custom fields than than QuickBooks Desktop, so just keep that in mind, that if you're going from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, you had all these custom fields, and you're looking for QuoteWorks being able to map to them. There's just a limitation in QuickBooks Online right now where they just don't have as many fields. The defaults tab, this is where I was talking about earlier when we were exporting our document over to QuickBooks and we were setting those default fields. So when a item does not exist in QuickBooks, these are the default fields you can set. I don't have any set just because we don't sell that much through our demos, so obviously it's not important for us to set, but this is where you can set if you're almost always non-inventory items, and you can set your COGS account, asset account, sales account, and you can go through and you can set it for each type, if you're inventory, non-inventory, whatever it's going to be. So it can just, again, save you some time if you'd like, so you don't have to go through and set these defaults each time. Items, this is if you want to display the QuickBooks item list in your QuoteWorks product lookup window, so you have access to the QuickBooks item list. And then the QuickBooks Online info, that's going to be, you see here it says copy to clipboard, very useful for the support team. So if you're having an issue with getting QuickBooks Online and QuoteWorks integrated and you contact our support team and they're asking you for your QuickBooks Online info, it's kind of hard sometimes to figure out what version of QuickBooks Online you're running, what, all the information that they need. So you can go to that QuickBooks Online info and you can copy that info to the Windows clipboard so we can get a copy of it, and then we can send it over to the support team so they can take a look, and that'll have the important information that they need. Okay. So once you've set up the link, you're pretty much ready to go. The only other setting you may need to adjust is your purchase order integration. So if you're going to have QuoteWerks also export your documents over to QuickBooks as POs, you'll need to make sure you set your integration to QuickBooks, and then we'll go ahead and hit OK. So let's walk through exporting the document to QuickBooks as a purchase order. So like I said in the very beginning, you'll basically need to decide kind of what your workflow is going to be. If you're going to have QuoteWerks send over documents to QuickBooks as an estimate, the invoice or the sales receipt, or you can have us send it over as the PO, but we don't recommend doing both, as an estimate and then separately as a PO later, just because there's no way in QuickBooks Online to connect the documents. So you're going to end up with these kind of almost duplicate versions essentially of the same ordering or the same order information. So we recommend essentially you'll need to decide or want to decide if you want to pull in the, if you want us to create the estimate invoice or sales receipt, or if you want us to create the PO. So if you want QuoteWerks to create the PO, we would click on our purchasing icon here, or you can get there under your tools purchasing option. And let me just save my document there. And this is going to bring up our ordering window. And then you can filter by vendor. So we'll just do, let's do Dell and a couple items here. And then you'll see the option for create PO. So we'll create PO. And then the important part here is going to be, one, the PO number. So you'll see here it says leave PO number blank to use a QuickBooks generated PO number. So if you want to use the QuickBooks auto numbering, you can leave that blank. If you want to type in your own number, you can do that. If you want to use the next number in QuoteWerks, you can do that as well. So it's going to be up to you how you want that numbered. The ref ID, flooring account, and description, this is for you, for your internal use in QuoteWerks. So once we export this document over to QuickBooks, this information is only for QuoteWerks. It'll show up under our purchase orders tab. It's not going to be exported over to QuickBooks. And then very important, in order for us to create this document in QuickBooks, you do have to have this checkbox of QuickBooks. I'm actually going to change this to Ingram Micro because I don't think I have Dell set up as a vendor. So that's going to be very important, is that if your vendor is not set up, you will get a message letting you know that. And then just like when we're creating the order or the an estimate or invoice or sales receipt in QuickBooks, when you're creating the purchase order, if an item doesn't exist, it is going to prompt you and say, okay, you need to set the item type and also the income account, and then I'll walk through each one. All right. So once the document's in QuickBooks, it's going to look just like it would in typically with your estimates and invoices and all that information. This is on the purchase orders tab in QuoteWerks. So if I change it to today, you can see your document here. You can track your information in QuoteWerks here. So you can put your tracking number, serial number, all that information, or you can just go into QuickBooks and track it from QuickBooks. So again, very straightforward for exporting over to QuickBooks. But the important thing to note is going through like the choosing if you're going to have QuoteWerks created as an estimate, invoice, and sales receipt. I know I keep repeating that, but it's very important to understand that because these documents cannot be associated with each other, you could be duplicating this information in QuickBooks. So you just need to decide when are you going to send that document over to QuickBooks. Is it after the customer accepts it, and then you're going to kind of do your ordering through QuickBooks, or are you going to do your ordering through QuoteWerks and then have QuoteWerks create the PO in QuickBooks? So just kind of decide which way to go there. So, okay, so we have a ton of questions. So I'm going to start going through these questions, kind of starting at the top and kind of go through here. So the first one is, yes, is this an add-on to QuoteWerks? Yes, it is. So the QuickBooks Online subscription is an add-on. You need to be on the professional or corporate edition of QuoteWerks, just like you would for the QuickBooks desktop integration. And then the integration is $20 a month for the monthly integration, or it's $220 for the annual subscription. So basically you save $20 if you pay for it up front. The integration, we do offer trials, so if you want to test it out, make sure it's worth it for you, we can definitely set that up for you so you can test it out. It is a site license integration, so that means that when you install or when you set up the integration, you can have as many users as you have QuoteWerks licenses utilizing the integration. It's up to you. All right. Okay, so Ali asked, can you create multiple purchase orders per quote? Yes, Ali, so basically the way the purchase orders work is by vendor. So you could actually have, you could batch orders. So if you have, 2 or 3 quotes with, 6 or 7 vendors, you could end up creating 6 or 7 POs because it's going to be by vendor rather than by quote. If you'd rather send the information over to QuickBooks as a kind of a single document, then you'll probably want to go the way of exporting the document over as an estimate, invoice, or sales receipt rather than a PO document. Aaron asked, does this information transfer to QuickBooks Desktop Edition as well? Yes, Aaron, the integration is almost completely identical to the QuickBooks Desktop integration. So if you don't want to switch over to QuickBooks Online, you can definitely use the QuickBooks Desktop integration instead. Tom said that QuickBooks Online only allows us to store one contact. Can we keep our much larger contact base in QuoteWorks rather than integrating with QuickBooks Online? Tom, yeah, absolutely. You could use QuoteWorks to store your contacts. If you're using another CRM or PSA for contacts, you can use that. That's fine. We're just going to do a search and essentially pull them in, and then we'll create them if they don't exist in QuickBooks. Yeah, so you don't have to use QuickBooks Online for contacts. We just integrate it with it if you want to. Alex, no, this version of QuoteWorks is not online. We are working on our web version of QuoteWorks, but what you're seeing today is just the desktop version of QuoteWorks. Okay, so Dallas has a good question asking if you're using both Salesforce and QuickBooks, can you pull data from either Salesforce or QuickBooks? The answer is yes. Yeah, you kind of get to pick and choose which data you want to pull in. So you do have to specify where your contacts are coming from. My guess is that if you're pulling contacts, you're probably going to pull them from Salesforce in that case. So I would pull them from basically set up QuoteWorks to integrate with Salesforce on kind of like the CRM side of things, so we can create those opportunities, that type of information. And then when you're ready, you can export the information directly from QuoteWorks into QuickBooks Online. Jamie, yes, you can. We do work with, so the desktop version of QuickBooks that we support is going to be Pro, Premier, and Enterprise. So we basically work with all the versions of QuickBooks. So if you don't want to move to QuickBooks Online, the desktop integration is included in the professional and corporate editions of QuoteWorks. Dallas asked if there's an automatic sync for the products between QuickBooks and QuoteWorks. Kind of. And what I mean by that, it depends on where you're pulling your products from. If you're pulling your products from QuickBooks, then yes, QuoteWorks basically reads from the QuickBooks Online database. And anytime something's updated there, it'll automatically be updated in QuoteWorks. Now, what a lot of companies do is they choose to manage their items outside of QuickBooks. That way, they're not essentially cluttering QuickBooks with a bunch of items that don't sell or are not going to sell. So instead, they basically put that information in QuoteWorks or another system, and then we'll only export over documents to QuickBooks that have sold and that are actually going to contain items that you're going to sell. So it's just kind of up to you. But yeah, if you're going to use strictly QuickBooks for your item list, when QuoteWorks reads from there, that is a live link. You're not going to have to do like an import or anything like that. Okay, Ali asked a great question. She asked, if you post an estimate to QuickBooks Online, can you edit it in QuoteWorks and then repost the revised version? So once you export a document from QuoteWorks to QuickBooks, QuoteWorks assumes we're done with that document. So if you need to make a change to that document, you really have to go back into QuickBooks and make the change there. If you want to make that change in QuoteWorks, you can. But if you re-export that same document, it's going to duplicate it in QuickBooks Online. So we don't recommend doing that. We typically say, hey, if you need to make a change to the document after it's been exported to QuickBooks, just go ahead and do it in QuickBooks. If you want to change it in QuoteWerks also, you can. But yeah, you can't like change it in QuoteWerks and then re-export it and then it updates the existing document in QuickBooks. Their API just doesn't allow for that functionality. It only lets us create new documents, not update existing ones. And then Ali also asked, can you push a quote to ConnectWise and QuickBooks Online? Yeah, absolutely. So you could, it's not uncommon to have QuoteWorks essentially work with both systems where we are pulling the contacts from ConnectWise, we are creating the opportunity in ConnectWise, writing all the line item information into the ConnectWise opportunity. And then once the customer decides to move forward, we update the opportunity as one in ConnectWise. That'll go through creating tickets and projects and everything else that you need on the ConnectWise side of things. And then we can take that document from QuoteWorks and actually export it to QuickBooks Online. So you could absolutely do that if you wanted to. Yes, Bonnie, QuoteWorks will still integrate with QuickBooks. We're not removing that integration, so that's a great point to make. So if you're using QuickBooks Desktop or if QuickBooks Online just doesn't have the functionality that you need, so you have to stay with QuickBooks Desktop, yeah, you can continue to use the QuoteWorks integration. We're not going to discontinue support. We'll support the QuickBooks Desktop integration as long as QuickBooks Desktop is around. Stacy, kind of on the same question there, was asking if you're not using QuickBooks Online and you're using QuickBooks Desktop, what will the difference be? It won't be very different, Stacy. The integration, we designed it to look almost identical. So you'll actually kind of walk through the same process. It's a little easier to set up the desktop version of QuickBooks with QuoteWorks than the online ones because you don't have to validate the subscription and walk through that process. But as far as the actual export, it's going to look very similar to what you saw today. Dallas asked, when is version 5.3 due to come out? That should be out probably first couple weeks of November. So we're probably 3 or 4 weeks from it being available. We're just starting to kind of go through the testing phase of it. So it'll be coming out here in the next few weeks. Simon asked a great question, said, is the document number from QuoteWorks exported over to QuickBooks Online so that you can cross-reference the source at a later date? Yes, Simon, you can set it up where we can basically, we would typically recommend just dropping it into the memo field. So you can set the macro there and QuoteWorks will basically write the QuoteWorks document number into the memo field of the QuickBooks document. And that way, when you open that QuickBooks document in QuickBooks Online, in that memo field, you'll see the QuoteWorks document number. Alex, your question about if this can be set up to work in a Citrix environment, I'm not sure if you're asking about QuoteWorks or QuickBooks, but if you're asking about QuoteWorks, yeah, you can absolutely set it up in a Citrix environment. We have a lot of companies that use it that way and works great. If you're asking about QuickBooks, I believe you can. QuickBooks Desktop, I'm assuming. I believe you can, but you would have to check with like a QuickBooks Pro. I'm not an expert on their setup, unfortunately. So Eric asked a good question. He's asking, is there a way to pull information from QuickBooks into QuoteWorks that will not alter the chart of accounts and stop it from creating new QuickBooks items? So that's where I kind of talked about when you are setting up the mappings for between QuoteWorks and QuickBooks Online. You actually need to choose essentially a different option than the manufacturer part number for how QuoteWorks is going to identify if an item exists in QuickBooks or not. So QuickBooks Online requires that an item exists for us to create it on your QuickBooks Online document. So what a lot of companies do is they create kind of like generic part numbers where they call it like, you know, hardware or computer or laptop or whatever it's going to be, you know, service 1, service 2, these generic part numbers to all their items. And that way, when QuoteWorks looks for this item in QuickBooks, it says, oh, the part number is service 1, looks in the QuickBooks item list and says, oh, service 1 exists. Okay, go ahead and write it to the document. So that's kind of how you would have to get around that. It's unfortunately just the way QuickBooks works. It requires that information and won't let us put the line items into a QuickBooks document without it. but that's kind of how you get around it. So that's why we have the option for that drop down on that mappings window. I know that's kind of a little confusing, Eric, but I would say just contact support for that, and they can kind of tell you kind of how to get around that. But yeah, it is possible to do that. Stacy, great question. She asked if they integrate from QuickBooks Online, if they go from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, will their integration settings carry over? They will not. You'll actually have to reset those. So you might want to go through and take some screenshots because the windows look very similar and they have a lot of the same settings. So just maybe go through your integration, take some screenshots, and then you can walk through the QuickBooks Online setup. And yeah, Lynn asked, users can continue to use both a QuickBooks Online and a CRM or PSA such as Goldmine. Yeah, correct, absolutely, yeah. This is kind of like just like QuickBooks Desktop, as far as the integration goes, you still will have access to your CRM or your PSA system that you're integrated with. It's not meant to replace that. You can set it up to use contacts from QuickBooks Online if you want, but if you're using a CRM or PSA, yeah, we would expect you to continue to use that. Let's see. Okay. Bonnie, yes, this webinar will be available. We're going to post this recording on the website probably the next couple days, so you have access to it. So Broderick has a good question here, but it's probably not going to like my answer. Basically asking, what's the best practice to use QuoteWerks and QuickBooks or AutoTask kind of as like the CRM tool? So unfortunately, you'll have to kind of decide what works best for you. So we see a lot of companies that use AutoTask and QuoteWerks and QuickBooks, and they kind of go from, pull contact information from AutoTask, feed that information in QuoteWerks. QuoteWorks then feeds the opportunity information, and then you have the option of essentially going from AutoTask to QuickBooks or from QuoteWorks to QuickBooks. One is not necessarily better than the other. You might do both. You just kind of have to decide what's going to work best for you. But that's kind of the good and bad thing about the flexibility is you get to choose which way you want to go, but you do have to kind of make a choice if you're going to go from like QuoteWorks to AutoTask to QuickBooks or from AutoTask to QuoteWorks to QuickBooks. So it just kind of depends, but you do have the options to kind of which works best. So maybe I'm not really too familiar with AutoTask integration with QuickBooks. So if they have a better integration, maybe go with that one. I know our integration is very strong. So if we have a better integration, that might be the way to go. Yeah, Eric. So like I said, in order for us to write items into the QuickBooks document, they have to exist in the item list. It's just a requirement of the QuickBooks API. There's no way for us to get around that. So in order for you to get around that, you basically would have to create these like kind of like dummy part numbers, like generic part numbers, so that we're not creating a new item each time you're quoting out whatever you're quoting out. Like I said, for that contact support, because they have a whole write-up kind of how to do that and how to set it up so it doesn't update it. Hi, Judy. I would be happy to reach out to you offline and answer some of your questions about QuoteWorks and the QuickBooks integration. I can have one of the account managers contact you and answer any questions that you have. Okay, Aaron asked a great question. Aaron said, for the item export, does QuoteWorks also have the option to export by the item type or just the part numbers? Right now, it's just the manufacturer part number, vendor part number, and custom text fields in QuoteWorks. I know we're looking into adding the item type field as well. That's not in there just yet. So yeah, so it'll be manufacturer part number, vendor part number, or the custom text fields. Oh, okay, Judy. Yeah, if you just need the kind of the basics of the integration with QuickBooks, I can do that real quick. So, and that'll kind of be a good place to stop anyway. So just in summary, essentially the integration between QuoteWerks and QuickBooks. QuoteWerks will create any document that doesn't exist in QuickBooks as an estimate, invoice, or sales receipt. We'll write the line item information over from your QuoteWerks document into QuickBooks Online. If the item does not currently exist in QuickBooks, we'll go ahead and we'll create it for you. If the customer doesn't exist, we'll go ahead and create them for you as well. You'll also have the option to, instead of creating an estimate, invoice, or sales receipt, we can also create the purchase order instead. So if you're going to be doing your purchase ordering or you're ordering through QuoteWerks, we can then create that PO in QuoteWerks and then export that PO over to QuickBooks. And same thing, if those items don't exist, we'll actually create the items for you as well. So thank you everyone for attending today. If you do have additional questions, definitely let us know. We'd be happy to answer those for you. If you want a trial of the QuickBooks Online subscription, definitely just let us know. We're happy to set that up for you. Just takes a few minutes and you can get up and running and trial it and see if it's going to work out for you. So again, thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope everyone has a great day.